Hello guys, this is Teacher Leo. Today we're going to do a little review about simple present and the verb in third person because uh, all of us we were talking about the issues or the most common mistakes that you have in the previous homework about it. So in order to help you to understand this lesson, I'm going to provide you another video about it, and I'm going to explain you in the best way this lesson in order that you can understand uh, the lesson and how you can use the simple present and the verb in third person, right? So we're gonna start now. Right, guys, so in this moment you just need to pay attention and listen up, please. So when we're talking about simple present, we need to use the subject or the pronoun. In this case, we need to use I, you, he, she, it, you, we, and they, right? So later, when we are talking about I, you, they, and we use the verb in the base form. For example, if you can see in the first part, in the first line that says I buy, for example, I can tell you I buy a pizza, right? Now, when we are talking about third person, we are talking about he, she, or it. In this case, we need to use the verb, but we need to add an s or an es or an ions, right? I'm going to explain you the rules um, next, but now when we're talking about third person, for example, if you can see that if we still use the verb buy, we use, for example, he buys some books, right? Why? Because we are talking about a third person, right? So also we have another example here that says um, she buys an ice cream. Well, also when we are talking about simple present, we can use the auxiliary verb. In this case, we use the auxiliary verb do or does to make questions or to make negative statements. When we use do or does, we have the opportunity that change the verb. For example, we use do for I, you, we, and they, right? For example, if I want to make a question, I can tell you, do they have any children? Or do you speak English? Right? But when we are talking about third person, for example, he, she, and it, we use does. So when we use does, in this case, uh, we use the verb in the base form. We don't have to add an s or other letters at the end. So that's the reason that we use the uh, the auxiliary verb. So, for example, if you can see here, we have an one sentence that says he doesn't like sushi. In this case, we are making a negative statement, and we are using he and the auxiliary verb. In this case, the auxiliary verb is does, but how it is in negative, we use doesn't or does not plus the verb in the base form that is like. So if you can see, I don't using an extra letter here. Also, uh, I can tell you, For example, does she have any children? So for this answer, or for the answer for this question, we can say yes she does or no she doesn't, right? So that's the difference when we are using an um, an auxiliary verb in the third third person, right? All right. How I mentioned before, we have some rules when we are talking about the verbs in third person, right? So for verbs uh, that we use with he, she, or it, and the singular nouns, we have some rules. Remember that the most verb we need to add an s at the end of the verb. For example, for live, we say lives. For example, he lives, she lives, it lives. For sit, we add an s and we say he sits, she sits, it sits. For stay, also we add an s and we say she stays, he stays, it stays, right? So for the verbs that ending in consonant plus and y, we need to change the y to an I, and we need to add an es. For example, we have here try. So now we're gonna say tries. So we say uh, he tries, she tries, it tries. Now for carry, also you can see carry and in y, so we need to change it for I and S, right? So we say now carries, right? So we can say he carries, uh, she carries, or it carries, right? So for verb that ending in s, c, h, or x, we need to add an es, right? For example, we have here miss, so we say misses. We have bus, we say buses. We have here catch, we say catches. And we have fix, and we need to say fixes. For example, now we can say he misses, she misses, or he buses, she buses, or he catches, she catches. Also, we can say he fixes or she fixes, right? So, also we have here some exceptions, and the exceptions are go and do. So for go, we say goes, and for do, we say does. For example, he goes, she goes, or he does, she does, right? So um, these are the rules for the verbs, for the different verbs, and for the different endings. So um, you just need to pay attention with this, and you need to learn the instructions when you're making your homework or the tests. Also, remember that if you have any questions, if you have access to your My English Lab platform, you can use the grammar coach to complete this class. Or if you have questions, remember that that don't be hesitate to write us, and we are more than glad to um, answer your questions, right? So we're going to continue with the information questions uh, using the simple present, right? Okay, guys, this is the last part of this presentation, so please pay attention for this. Now we're gonna see information questions with simple present, right? So How I mentioned it before, do you remember that at the beginning of this video, I told you that we need to use the auxiliary verbs to make questions, right? So the auxiliary verb are do or does. Do you remember this part? Okay. So remember that we use do for I, you, we, and they, right? And we use does for he, she, and it. Okay. So in this case, when we are talking about he, she, and it, when we use does, we use the verb in the base form. We don't have to change the verb, right? We don't have to add an s or an en or an iens. No, we use the base form of the verb. Why? Because we are using an auxiliary verb, and when we are using an auxiliary verb, uh, the rules change, right? So, for example, I can tell you, where do you work, or what do you like to do, or where do you live, or something like that, right? Now, when we are talking about he, she, and it, we use does. So, for example, here I can tell you, where does she study? Where does he live? If you can listen, when I made a question, I'm using the auxiliary verb that is does, and I use the verb in the base form, right? Okay, now I can tell you, why does he work in the United States, for example, or why does she uh, study English, right? So if you can listen, I'm using the base form of the verb. So this is the thing that you don't have to forget, that when we are using an auxiliary verb, we use the base form of the verb. In this case, when we use I, you, they, or we use does, and we still be using the base form of the verb, right? Now remember that when we are talking about negative statements, uh, we use the auxiliary verbs, and as I mentioned it before, I told you that, for example, if I can tell you that, uh, for example, if I want to tell you that my mom um, doesn't like, um, I don't know, seafood, I can tell you, my mom doesn't like fish, for example, or you can say, for example, my sister doesn't study English, or I don't know, something like that. Or, for example, um, my sister or my aunt doesn't like sushi, for example. So that's the reason that we used an auxiliary verb, right? So if I tell you, or I want to say, I want to tell you that I don't like something, I use the verb do. So I can tell you I don't like um, onions, for example, or um I don't uh, I don't study in Don Bosco, or something like that, right? So remember that when we are talking about negative statements, also we need to use the auxiliary verb, like um, like in information questions, right? Don't forget it.
Alright guys, now to end this presentation, The last part is there is and there are, right? Do you remember that in a previous video I told you that we use there is or there are for countable and non countable nouns, right? So remember that in this case we use there is with a no count nouns and singular count nouns, right? Um, and you use there are with count nouns in plural, right? So here, as you can see, this is the page number 14 of your book. So if you have your book, you can check it, right? But now I'm going to explain this for you, right? So as you can see, we have in the first part some examples about it. So that says the first one says there is um, some milk and an apple in the fridge. In this case, we can use some or we can say there is milk and an apple in the fridge wherever it's okay, right? Why we use just milk and no one milk or something like that, right? In this case, milk is like a no noun. Why? Because we don't know how many is a milk, right? In this case, in the United States, we need to say 1 box of milk or 1 bottle of milk, right? So uh, also here we have there are some cookies in the kitchen. In this case, also we can say there are cookies in the kitchen. It is in plural, right? It is an indefinite amount or cookies. It could be 2, 3, or 4. So to negative statement using there is and there are, here we have there isn't any cheese or there aren't any bananas, right? So remember that we use there is for singular and there are for plural, right? In questions, we use there is and there are again, but we need to change the structure. In this case, to make a question, the question could be like this: is there any or some pasta? In this case, you can use any or some wherever it's okay. We can say there is any pasta or there is some pasta where it's okay. Also, we have are there any or some noodles? Um, Remember that again. We can say there is sorry there are any noodles or there are some noodles wherever it's okay, right? So also we have here another questions that we that we are using double questions. For example, what kind of fruit is there in this fruit salad, right? Um, Also, we have how many eggs are there in the fridge, right? If you can see in the first one, when I say what kind of fruit is there in this fruit salad, I'm asking just for one fruit. That's the reason that I'm using it is there. And in the second one, it says how many eggs. It is in plural, so that's the reason that we use are there, right? This is the only thing that you need to remember. And in the last part, we use is there with anything or nothing, right? So in this case, you need to remember and you don't have to forget that we use nothing for affirmative statements and we use anything for negative statements. For example, if the question is there anything to eat? The answer could be no, there is nothing, or no, there isn't anything, right? So, um, this is the difference that when you have to use anything or nothing. So remember that you use nothing for affirmative statements and you use anything for negative statements. So, guys, please don't forget it. And remember that if you have any questions about it, you can write us, and we are more than glad to help you with your questions or with any doubt that you can have. So I I hope that this video can be very helpful for you. So thank you for your attention and see you next time.